We know it's pretty smart to go receiver in the early rounds, but which guy do you take? Here are the ones that we're taking over and over again. These are our must-have early round receivers. Chris, who's the first one that you are pushing that draft button on?
I'm drafting Chris Olave in the early rounds. In the second round, really every chance I can. And look, I know a lot of people love Garrett Wilson this year. I love Garrett Wilson this year. But Garrett Wilson's going to require a first-round draft pick more than likely. Chris Olave typically falls to the middle of the second round, and there shouldn't be this big of a gap between Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. If you look at these guys just as pure talents, they're both elite wide receivers. Were elite wide receivers as rookies, both great route runners, great against all sorts of different coverages. But even if you look at their numbers, they were almost identical. I mean, in 2 extra games, Garrett Wilson only had 9 more catches and 60 more yards than Chris Olave, yet people value him about a half round higher than Chris Olave. I don't really get it. And you can't say Garrett Wilson has, this quarterback upgrade that Chris Olave isn't getting. I know I like to pick on Derek Carr a lot in our videos, because he is very frustrating to have in fantasy. But we know Derek Carr can support a top-end, high-end wide receiver. He just did it with Devontae Adams last year. He did it a few years ago with Darren Waller. I know Darren Waller's a tight end, but at that time he was basically the Raiders' wide receiver. And he even made Hunter Renfrow a thing that people wanted to draft in their fantasy leagues. Like, Derek Carr can absolutely support Chris Olave as a top 10, if not even a top 5 wide receiver. This guy is an absolute stud. He can run every type of route. He can separate against man, zone, press. It doesn't matter. And Derek Carr is going to force feed him targets, because that is what Derek Carr does. When Derek Carr has a wide receiver like Chris Olave, he will just lock onto him and feed him target after target after target. So I love Chris Olave this year in the second round. Doesn't require that first round draft capital. If you start with one of the other wide receivers, you can get Chris Olave. Or if you start with running back in the first round, having Chris Olave as your wide receiver 1, totally fine. I'm grabbing Chris Olave every chance I can this year.
Yeah, those of you saying, oh, Chris Olave just feels too soon in round 2. No, not at all for me. And I get why people might maybe prefer a receiver tied to like Aaron Rodgers as opposed to Derek Carr. I think it's a good thing being tied to Derek Carr, because like you said, he will force feed one guy. He will go to him over and over again, and that's what you want. So that's why you might say, I don't know how excited I can get about a receiver who's tied to Jared Goff. I'm pretty excited about the fact that I know he will force targets towards Amon-Ra St. Brown, because that's what he did last year, and he's going to have to do it again this year. Let's face it. Okay, 106 catches last year, 1161 yards. Why wouldn't he do it again this year? I mean, Jameson Williams, oh yeah, he's suspended for 6 games, and when he comes back, you could just assume that he's all of a sudden going to be a stud. I'm not assuming that. The guy's barely seen an NFL field. It's going to take him time to get acclimated to the game, to develop chemistry with Goff, which he does not have. I mean, there's really no competition for targets here, not different from last year. You can talk about Jahmyr Gibbs if you want. He's just replacing DeAndre Swift, okay? This is not true target competition. I don't know that you want to say I'll play it safe in the early rounds, but you kind of do. You definitely don't want to bust. You won't win your league with your first or second round pick, but you can probably hurt your team a lot. I think that he's pretty much the safest receiver you can go to when you're talking about the first 2 rounds. And I don't mind saying, yeah, I'll settle for 100 catches and maybe 1,200 yards. I'm fine with that. And then sticking to those early rounds, who's the other guy that you just keep drafting over and over?
Yeah, there's an interesting thing about the wide receivers in the early rounds. I mean, you have like the top 4 studs, then you have like the next tier studs, then you kind of have this like third tier of studs, and then you get to like Devonta Smith and T. Higgins, and once those guys are gone, it kind of feels like the wide receivers in that next range are all the same. And you're looking at guys like Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, who I don't really like that much, Keenan Allen, Christian Watson, like a lot of guys like that. But there's one guy in this range who I feel like really jumps out to me, and I keep drafting him over and over, and that is Amari Cooper. And I get it. A lot of people don't like to draft guys like Amari Cooper because, oh my gosh, one week you get 30 and he wins you your week, and then the next week you get 5. Those week-winning weeks are very important, because if one guy can win you a week multiple times a year, that is huge in fantasy. I don't think people give that enough value, but even still, I think we're going to see a more consistent Amari Cooper this year for a couple of reasons. Number one, Deshaun Watson, we've talked about him a bunch. He's going to be better this year. He's going to have a full offseason with the Browns, with these receivers, without having to worry about all this off the field stuff. But also, the Browns have shown their hand. There are still a lot of people out there who think the Browns are going to be some crazy run-heavy offense like we've seen in the past. They're not. What have they shown us? What have they done at running back so far? Well, nothing. They let Kareem Hunt walk, and they didn't replace him with anybody. What have they done at wide receiver? Well, they went out, traded for Elijah Moore, a young dynamic wide receiver. They drafted Cedric Tillman in the 3rd round. They're paying their quarterback, who they traded 3 first-round picks for last year, gobs of money. Does that sound like a team who's committed to running the ball and not passing? Like, guys, it's smacking you in the face. They're going to be one of the pass-heaviest teams. And even last year with Deshaun Watson, there's a reason why Nick Chubb wasn't scoring touchdowns last year. They had 16 opportunities inside the opponent's 6-yard line last year. They ran the ball 1 time out of those 16. Even with Deshaun Watson playing as bad as he was, when they got near the goal line, they dialed up passes. They put the ball in Deshaun Watson's hands. This year, with a better Deshaun Watson, they're absolutely going to throw the ball more, and people who understand this are going to reap the rewards when they draft these wide receivers. Amari Cooper, clearly the best wide receiver on this team. I like Elijah Moore. I like Tillman. I like DPJ, but they're not on the same level as Cooper. He's going to be Deshaun Watson's number 1 target in one of the pass-heaviest offenses with a QB who I expect to be significantly better this year. So for me, when you get to this range of wide receivers, if Cooper is there, he's the guy I want every time.
All right, I'm going to follow up with another guy who maybe isn't the most young, dynamic receiver anymore, but like DJ Moore, maybe this is finally what you consider his breakout or best season. Yeah, I know it sounds weird because he's with Justin Fields, who gets, all the time questioned about whether he can even throw the ball or not, as if he's not a legitimate quarterback. Look, we've heard it over and over again. DJ Moore and Justin Fields are developing chemistry. They got their guy, all right? He's going to be the number 1 receiver. We know this. The Bears are going to throw the ball more, right? No, they're not going to be a pass-heavy offense, but you don't need to be that. All right, DJ Moore, despite having played with all sorts of, you got inferior quarterback play, whatever you want to say, in Carolina. These guys are not at the level of Justin Fields now entering his 3rd season. Fields will find more early and often, even with all that quarterback play that he's had to endure. Moore has finished as a top 24 PPR wide receiver every season since his rookie season. Okay, so I think that wide receiver 2 is a sure bet for him. He finally has the upside to possibly a top 15 receiver, and the value is great for him because he was barely even going in the first 4 rounds earlier in the offseason. I don't think his ADP will climb that much because people are just so skeptical of the Bears' passing game. So it's just a screaming value to me to get DJ Moore where you can get him. Those are some receivers that we got to have. What about at every position? You want to see a guy who could be that league winner? Well, we got him for you right here.